Welcome, everyone, to tonight's Housing Forum hosted by YIMBY Fort Collins. We have 6 of the candidates for mayor here with us tonight. YIMBY, or Yes in My Backyard, is a local group of volunteers that advocates for abundant, affordable, and stable housing. Over the past couple years, we have helped repeal the notorious U+2 occupancy limit in Fort Collins. We routinely show up to support affordable housing projects when they come before community meetings or zoning hearings or before council. And we push for better land use policies, both locally and at the state level. My name is Peter Erickson. I'll be your moderator tonight. I'm actually a faculty member at Colorado State University, and in my spare time, also a volunteer lead of YIMBY Fort Collins. I wanted to give a special thank you tonight to the Horse and Dragon for hosting us. Some of you may know the Horse and Dragon Brewery is also a great supporter of housing issues and dialogue about housing, so we really appreciate them. And thank you also to our candidates. And I want to thank them both for coming out tonight, being willing to talk to us, and actually for being willing to run for local office, which we all know is really important. Very grateful to have you. I'll say just a few words about the format. Tonight's forum will run about an hour, and we will have 6 of the candidates here with us. Candidates will have 1 minute for each question. Matthew Behunin, where are you, Matthew? There he is. Matthew will be keeping time tonight, so he will raise his hand when 1 minute is up, and once I see that cue, I will start to very gently interrupt the candidates. In the interest of fairness, we will rotate the speaking order over the course of the night to give everyone a chance to answer first. I made that promise before we had 6 candidates on stage, so we will do our best on that one. But yes, I'll note that tonight's event is being recorded. So we are planning to post this to YouTube. It's not being live streamed, but we will have a recording of it, and we'll post a full recording to YouTube. And there is a reporter from the Coloradoan present. I saw her earlier. Hi, Erin. So Erin is also here. As moderator, I might ask a brief follow-up to clarify a point, but I hopefully won't have to do that often and can do that as sparingly as possible. I encourage the candidates not to interrupt one another, if possible, and not to attack the character of one another. A lot of you are all friends, actually, and have known each other for years, so I don't expect that. But let's try to keep things positive and focused on policy tonight. And for the audience as well, if you could hold your applause during the candidate statements and until the end, that would be fantastic. So thank you for that. I will remind you, actually, before we begin, that this will be Fort Collins' first ranked choice voting election. We're lucky, you're excited about that. So you may have an opportunity to vote for all of the candidates in front of you tonight. It's going to be harder to pick this year than it would in an ordinary year. So thank you all for being here. So I'd like to start off with a quick round of introductions, if I could. And if you would, please introduce yourself. Talk about maybe how you came to run for council. And for fun, please describe, if you would, the first apartment, house that you lived in when you first moved out on your own. Do you remember how much it cost? What do you like about it? Do you have a good landlord? What do you remember about that experience? So why don't we start at the end with Scotty? Thank you.
All right. Well, first of all, thank all of you for coming out and listening to us. We are just people excited about city government, and we're kind of nerds and dorks about it. So thanks for listening to us nerd out and dork out about policy. It's one of our favorite things. And I'd like to thank all the candidates, and I'd also like to thank YIMBY for inviting all the candidates as well. That was a really big thing for me. I heard about this through the Colorado and through Facebook, and then I sent a message like, hey, there's 7 of us, it's not just 4. So we're all here, and I'm so glad that you're here to listen to us all. So my name is Scott VanTatenhove, or Scotty V. I've run for mayor twice before. I've lived in Fort Collins since 1983. I grew up through the Poudre School District. I left for college, I left for graduate school, and that's it. I work in Poudre School District for the past over 25 years. I have lots of experience. I was on the transportation board for 4 years here. It's one of the community boards. I helped build the FOCO Mex Festival with a few friends and the Fort Collins Musicians Association. I'm an all-about-town person. My mom owned a small business on Linden Street, and now I'm going to tell you about my rent, because you said
Very briefly.
was a basement apartment of a house on Remington that was $460 a month rent, and I had to leave my my contract early because I couldn't afford it anymore. I had to move back in with my parents. Wow. And I was a teacher at the time.
What was your block on Remington?
It was 3 blocks south of the Fort Collins High School, so I can't remember. It was the owners of Peak to Peak Paintings house.
Fabulous. Adam.
My name's Adam Eggleston. I've been a resident of Fort Collins since 1993. Went to CSU and got my master's in business administration. And for the last about 12, 13 years, I've been heavily engaged in city governance as on task force and working groups. I've served on 3 different committees to get rid of U+2, change rental licensures or restrict rental licensures. So I've always had a knack and interest in policy and meetings and just kind of being civically engaged. I'm currently a victims advocate with a local agency, and my first home that I had when I moved out of my home was over off of Boardwalk Apartments, and the rent was $825 a month.
Fabulous. And Emily?
Peter, can you repeat the question? There's 2 of them, right? I just want to make sure I'm
Yes,
answering
how
your
you
questions.
came to run for council, who you are. Everyone knows who you are, but who you are. And first apartment, first living experience away from home.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know, my name's Emily Francis. I am currently on city council and also the mayor pro tem. So I'll start off with where I lived first after high school. I actually didn't go to college first, and I moved to Steamboat Springs, and I lived in employee housing, which meant 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment, which was very interesting. I lived with 3 Brazilians who were here for the winter, and we paid $300 each. And so how I came to be on city council in 2019, I ran for city council for the first time. I ran again in 2023 and was reelected. At the time, I was doing mobile home park organizing, working with residents on how to advocate for a better quality of life. And at the time, they really wanted to focus on the preservation and protection of mobile home parks. And so I worked with them, and finally, they were able to advocate to get very specific land use code changes in the city of Fort Collins to help preserve and protect mobile home parks, which is an important piece of housing in our community.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, and Austin?
Hey everybody, my name is Austin White. I really appreciate you guys coming out and talking to us this evening. I moved to Fort Collins summer of 2022, just off of a whim because I was homeless at the time and traveling around and whatnot, and I found Fort Collins and just fell in love with the town my first couple months here, mainly because everybody is so nice, welcoming. I love how it's a family and college town. It's a good place to set roots, so I decided to run for mayor to help preserve that kind of community, keep quality of life up, and just hope I can do anything I can to make living here in Fort Collins as enjoyable as possible. My first apartment here in Fort Collins was actually down on East Drake Road. At Governor's Park, my rent was $1,657 a month. Unfortunately, I was only there for a few months. I was living with my little brother, and we had to surrender the keys to the apartment because we couldn't afford it anymore. So, yeah, that's how that went.
Yeah, Shirley.
Good evening, everyone. I am Shirley Peel. I'm a 25-year resident of Fort Collins. I've been married to my awesome husband for 38 years. We raised our 4 children here. My background is education, but I did serve on Fort Collins City Council, and I am currently serving on the Planning and Zoning Commission. The reason I ran for council the first time, all my kids were gone, and you have to reinvent yourself after you raise your kids, and I just wanted to serve and give back to the community. So I ran and was elected and served. I think I'm the oldest one on the panel, and so I'm so old I don't remember my first apartment. But I will say that I'm a big proponent of mobile home parks because Mobile homes have been a source of affordable housing for me 3 times in my life. Once when I was in college, once when I first got married, and once when my husband decided to go back to graduate school and we had 3 small children.
Excellent. Thank you, Shirley. Tricia.
Hi, I'm Tricia Canonico. Thank you all for coming tonight. Like a lot of moms, I started by volunteering in the schools, and then I just kept going with my volunteer work. I worked on campaigns. I served as the co-lead of Moms Demand Action in town. I was on the board of the Family Center, and then I was asked to step up, and I wanted to see new leadership in my district, so I ran. I grew up in the military and then just kept kind of moving, so I think I've lived in about 30 different houses. But the apartment I would really think of as my first apartment was in Denver, right on Ogden off of Spear. It was $290 a month. I was working on my PhD at DU and was working multiple jobs. So it was still a stretch to do that. But I think it's what we're all fighting for. Something that you can afford to live in, somewhere you can walk to everything you need, and somewhere where you can build community.
So excellent. So we're going to start off with our first question, and this will go to Adam as we kind of rotate through the order here. I wanted to start off with kind of a heartbreaking statistic. According to a poll from the Colorado Health Foundation, 71% of Coloradans say that they worry they won't be able to stay in Colorado due to high housing costs. That's 71%, more than 2/3 of Coloradans. Among young people ages 18 to 29, that number jumps to 87% of Coloradans. Among renters, 90% fear that they won't be able to stay in Colorado. And 90% of parents in the survey worried that their children won't be able to stay in the state. So increasingly, to be young, to be low income, to be a renter, to have children, is to worry about how long your family will be able to afford to live here. And so our first question is, how did the housing shortage get this bad? How did it get this bad? What's your kind of take? And what do you think are the most important things that the city could do to make it better? And of course, we'll cycle through some of those issues as we go, but that's a start for us. Adam?
Thank you for the question. It is disheartening with those numbers and how many folks feel they can't afford to live in Fort Collins. And I experienced it with even my friends I graduated high school with. A lot of them had to move to other cities throughout northern Colorado or out of the state. Part of, I think, one of the reasons that we've seen such a influx or a deflux in affordable housing and just market rate housing that most people can afford stems back from the 2008 building defects law, which made it nearly impossible to build for-sale condos. And that left a gap within the middle housing development. And so even those individuals that got into affordable housing, which we don't have enough of, didn't have a pathway to have the mobility to go from affordable housing to a condo unit up to a single family home. And we made it pretty much through regulations and litigation that the only options is to rent or to buy a single family home, which doesn't work for a majority of our residents and our citizens. So we need to readdress on how we can actually spark and incentivize for sale condos being built that really attract that middle housing.
Go ahead and finish your sentence.
Attract the middle housing and increase housing mobility to reduce the time that someone stays in a property by 11 years currently down to about 8 years. And that will actually open up a lot more housing and actually increase affordable housing as well.
Cool, thank you. Emily?
Those are sad statistics. So as a public health professional, I know that one of the biggest contributors to community and stability in people's lives is housing, which is why housing is so important, to have housing that everyone can afford in your community. So to me, there are 3 main things that led to where we got here. One is the condo deflex law. The second is about 10 years ago when we had the housing collapse with the subprime mortgages and everyone lost their homes, and then we stopped building homes for a long time to try and recover from that. And the third is that we have built up regulations that make it very difficult to build housing across America. This isn't just Fort Collins. Through zoning, through things like the Planning and Zoning Commissions, through increased rules and regulations and standards. It has just become so difficult, so confusing, and so expensive to build housing now. I think that those 3 things have really gotten to where we are. There are some things we can do about those, and I I'm sure we'll have
We'll
questions.
come back to them. Yeah,
Right.
Excellent. Yeah, Austin?
So my biggest take on this issue, which I agree with the other candidates, the statistics are very heartbreaking and saddening to say the least when hearing about it. I think some things that we could do to help with housing affordability is focus more on the whole general population of Fort Collins rather than just some select groups of people. Like I've noticed here in Fort Collins the last few years, a lot of the focus has just been on Colorado State University students rather than the general population. And I think if we focus more on everybody rather than just those that are students, some more housing can become more affordable because we can bring together everybody's, how do you say it? Preferences on certain locations and building and whatnot to just help with like building more apartment complexes and things like that to increase the affordability so people aren't struggling too hard.
Thank you, Austin. Yeah. Shirley?
As I said before, I have 4 children, and they're all young professionals, and they can't afford to live here. And so I'm not surprised by the statistics. And I've been reading Strongtown's book called Housing Trap. And I was telling a gentleman earlier that I actually am getting angry reading this book because how we got here is through bad laws, bad regulation from the federal level and down. And so it is a trap. It's not an easy fix. It's not going to happen overnight. But just some, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but just some quick things that I feel pretty strongly about. Make sure we have the best development review process possible. Protect property rights and allow zoning flexibility for a variety of housing types. Incentivize private sector building instead of government-run programs. Invest in infrastructure that supports growth. And promote home ownership as a path to stability. And so I know these are, hopefully we'll get into more of this later.
Fabulous. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Tricia?
When I was starting to really learn about what our problems are with housing, I read M. Nolan Gray's Arbitrary Lines. And that really had an impact on me. And looking back, I think it began in the early part of last century, where people wanted to shape what their neighborhoods looked like. And to do that, that meant keeping people out of their neighborhoods. So we have just built regulation upon regulation so that we're in the spot now where I think it's about 85% of most land is now only zoned for single family dwellings. So I think to really get out of this crisis, we need to start looking at how do we allow for greater housing choice? How do we have smaller lot sizes so that more people can build in an area? And how do we get rid of those layers upon layers of regulations that we put in place? So I think that's the basis, but I'm sure there's more questions to come.
Yeah, and Scotty?
Can I get a repeat of the question?
So,
It's been a little bit.
yeah, no worries. So basically, so many Coloradans say that they're afraid that
Yeah, I don't need the statistics. There was just that one question.
How did it get this bad?
Okay,
What's your kind of diagnosis? And what do you think we should do about it?
These are fantastic answers of government about government. People who know government answering about what government did. I'm going to take a switch now because that's what all my notes also said to say. So being the last one, I'm going to say we're also responsible for creating one of the most loved communities in this entire country. Fort Collins, when you tell someone that you live in Fort Collins, you are usually met with, oh, I want to be there. I've heard about that place. You're so close to the mountains. You're so close to recreation. It's an educated community. Bands, beers, bikes. There's a reason why this town is desired. It's because of what we've built with very little. And unfortunately, it is coming back to haunt us with supply and demand. That is understandable. And we can address those things as well as all the governmental regulations on building and condo use. Those are that blankets the entire state or the entire county. We as a unique gem of a place called Fort Collins that I've been a part of since 1983 is wonderful because of this. And we have to realize that this is attractive and people with money will want to live here because this is beautiful and how we treat each other is beautiful.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question will go to Emily first. In 2015, the city set a goal of having 10% of its overall housing supply be dedicated to deed-restricted affordable housing. So this is with income-based repayment, some form of public subsidy. And yet, year after year, we continue to fall short of our affordable housing goals. Why is that? And what can we do to build more deed-restricted, capital A, affordable housing?
In 1 minute? All right, so repeat just the question again.
Why are we not hitting our targets for 10% affordable housing in Fort Collins?
I mean, oh my gosh. All right, well, only 1 minute. Okay, don't start me yet. I have to think about how to get my comprehensive thoughts together going first.
It is a disadvantage to have to go
I know, it really is. Okay, why aren't we reaching 10%? Well, one is we don't have the money. So we have enough money to build maybe 100 deed restricted affordable units. That leaves 180 units short. 180 units, now it takes $475,000. It's about $40 million gap.
Every year.
Every
Yeah.
year
Yep.
to build those housing. So if we want publicly subsidized housing, we need $40 million a year. We also need to streamline our processes. We need to make it easier to navigate. We need to not be so anti-development because we actually do want affordable housing in our community. So we need to work better with our development community and bring them in as a partner.
Excellent. Yeah, and Austin.
So we're not hitting the 10% goal for affordability, right?
So
what you're
it was a
saying?
10% goal by 2040,
Okay.
but we're also not hitting our annual targets that will ever get us to that goal by 2040. Yeah.
Okay. So like she was saying, we need $40 million to hit that 10%. So
Annual.
what
Yeah.
annually? Okay. So what I think we could do to hit that number, so we can start doing the public subsidies to get affordable housing up, is Fort Collins, especially in Old Town, downtown Fort Collins. You have a lot of people that like to play music, and you have all these little shops that people set up and whatnot. I personally think if we were to invite more of that into Fort Collins, to, I guess, increase the enjoyment of downtown more than it already is, I think that would help bring a lot more into the city, more people that would want to move here, especially all the tourists that we get every year, that would enjoy moving to Fort Collins and want to live here for an extended period of time, which brings
you
more
so
money
much.
into the system.
Finish off your sentence. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, all set? Yeah. Okay, Shirley.
Okay. Okay, let me get my thoughts arranged. Okay, so like Emily said, it comes down to the money, right? And I don't know if this has been done, but I would like to look at where, if we're spending the money where it needs to be spent, and if some money can be reallocated from someplace else. Also, this is something you're going to hear me say over and over again tonight. We've got to streamline our processes. We have got to make it more efficient. I think that we need to look at what other cities have done where they have gone for low-hanging fruit, and I have some ideas about that. I just don't have time to talk about them right now, and start there. And I also think the city needs to be proactive, and what I mean by that is I think that we wait, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we wait for developers to come to us and say, we want to do this here. I think we need to start going along transit lines and find an infill where we can go, oh, this would be a great place. Let's find a developer that's willing to develop this.
Excellent. Thank you, Shirley. Tricia.
Yeah, I think we know the root causes: money, regulation, so many hindrances put in place in the face of developers. But I think one way that we could move forward is to be a little more creative in the way we work. We're seeing the URA be more innovative in the work that they do, and I think that we could really look at more plan areas across the city. I think South College is an opportunity that's waiting for us to jump in. And so I think that will create more opportunities and we can work better with developers. We're seeing that happen on the north side and I'd like to see it happen elsewhere in the city.
Excellent. Yeah, and Scotty?
All right. Are there beer coasters in this? Do you guys have beer coasters like Odell's or the round beer coasters lying on you? No? Okay. Well, Venn diagrams. Think of a Venn diagram. When you put two circular beer coasters next to each other and they overlap, that's usually where you get like, what works. For affordable housing, you need 12 coasters and they all need to overlap at the exact point. It's extremely difficult and there's billions of dollars involved of aligning those coasters. And if one of those coasters pulls out at the last second, the whole thing falls apart. And we are now with a federal government that is in control of at least 3 of those coasters. And think about how this federal government thinks about affordable housing in YIMBY. Now think about how difficult it's going to be to align those coasters to work in affordable housing the way it has worked in the past. That's how it works here in the state of Colorado. We will not meet that goal with this current setup. That's how we got here.
Adam?
Thank you for the question. So I think a lot of it goes into what we can control and not control to reach that goal. As a city and as a mayor, you can't control commodity prices and external prices. What you can control is things like water. I think we can look at we should do tiered water tap to make it less expensive to build condos and apartments at affordable housing rates. So those projects can actually see real-time instant reductions in costs. We also need to decrease the time it takes to development and entitlements. The affordable housing project behind Odell's, that's Habitat for Humanity, is taking way too long to develop and go through entitlements. So we need to really streamline, and we've all said that, but streamline the process, because future dollar principle is the longer we wait to develop these, the more expensive it is, and we will never be able to spend enough money to make that 10%. So doing things that we can control, realign the fee structures, our capital fee structures incentivize large single-family homes and not attached 700 square foot or similar size units. So our fee structure does not incentivize smaller affordable housing. It does not incentivize, and the water structure does not incentivize water structuring.
Thank you, Adam. Excellent. So question number 3, this one will go to Austin first. Housing experts emphasize that affordability depends not just on having a large enough supply of housing, but also on having more housing options, more kinds of housing, more housing types. Some of you have mentioned this already. The city of Fort Collins currently bans building cottage courts and townhomes and small apartment buildings on most residential land in the city, which has led to a shortage of affordable homes for people who live and work here. What policies would you change at the city level to bring a greater variety of housing types to Fort Collins?
That is a very good question. I'm glad I got this one. So the way I see it is when it comes to changing policies, I personally agree. Yes, that ban is really messing everything up when it comes to the affordability of housing. But also another thing that is possibly cutting it in half, if not more, with it is the historic preservation of certain buildings in town. Yes, historic preservation is important, but not every single building that has been built is historic, in my opinion. So I would think if that ban got lifted and we go throughout town, especially up on North College, and we take some of these abandoned buildings that are on lots, either demolish or flip them, turn them into subsidized housing, townhomes, small apartment complexes, things like that, and put down an affordable rate for rent would greatly increase housing affordability and would take some stress off some of the community and people that live here in Fort Collins.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Shirley.
Sorry, I had something I really wanted to say here. So I know housing supply is not the total answer, and I do understand that the variety is key to resolving this situation. But as we know, there is a large portion of our population that worries about density. They worry about the investments in their houses. And right now, because it's outlawed, I think we need to try to work with what we have. And what I mean by that is we need to start, like again, with low-hanging fruit. Can we build along the transit line, build density along the transit line? Can we put these new housing variety types in newer neighborhoods? Can we do, do an opt-in for neighborhoods, do an overlay in their neighborhood for density? And I think once we do that and we bring these people along and we show them that this is not a bad thing, it's not going to destroy the character of their neighborhoods, I think that we can get a lot further down the path.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. And Tricia.
So an article recently came out about how well Portland is doing with their housing reforms. And the most popular type of housing for infill in existing neighborhoods is cottage clusters. Those aren't allowed in Fort Collins. We tried to bring that in with our land use code update that we did a few years ago. That was a petition came out, we had to overturn it. That happened twice. Since then, we've seen a lot happen at the state level that's opened up housing options for our cities and other cities across the state. And I think that's now given us the opportunity to, again, look piecemeal at our land use code and make some advances there and allow for these housing types, allow for the 3 and 4 plex units in existing neighborhoods and move to these cottage clusters. There was so much angst over ADUs. We've allowed them now in Fort Collins, and we can see that our neighborhoods are okay. They have not completely transformed. So I think we have a way to move forward.
Thank you, Tricia. Yep, Scotty.
All right. Anybody here from Preserve Fort Collins? All right. So it's land use code. You change the land use code, we can change it. Exactly what you said before, Trish. We went forward with that, and Preserve Fort Collins killed it by standing outside liquor stores and getting signatures. That's how it was easily done. And they'll do it again and again and again. And if you want to change it, even with Polis saying that we're going to do it, there are municipalities suing Polis over what is going on right now with this. It is tough. It is really tough. So if you want to add additional ADUs, if you want the cottages, if you want that, you have to go in hard on land use code update. And if that's something that a council with me as mayor is interested in pursuing, let's look at it. But we know that we've got a very strong opponent in it through Preserve Fort Collins. And they'll fight it, just like there are organizations like that in every municipality here in Colorado, it feels like. And it's difficult because we often share a lot of values with the same people that are coming from that direction on other issues. And that is very difficult to juggle. And I'm going to try, because I love Fort Collins more than I love a party, or more than I love a liberal aspect, or more than I love a conservative aspect. But I love Fort Collins.
Yeah, Adam?
So I think there was a lot of pushback over the land use code, but I think pushing towards the community feel of cottage style developments, where instead of putting the porch on the backyard and losing that sense of community that we have built currently, go back to the yesteryears where the porch was on the front and embrace and enhance community. So I think if we look at it as building communities, not just affordable housing, we can kind of change the narrative. I would like to see the city build pilot neighborhoods in a couple different places. Once people see that the sky won't fall down when you build something, it's easier to convince the rest of the city. And I use this quick analogy is when we any one of us bought or moved into our first apartment or home, we didn't know if the couch would fit in the living room. Well, it's hard for anyone to conceptualize what a cottage neighborhood would look like without seeing it. Once we have examples through pilot programs that the city helps fund and develop, then we can actually get a better buy-in through the community.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, and Emily?
Question is, how do we increase
More
duplexes?
housing variety,
More
housing
variety.
types, yeah.
Well, we tried, as everyone talked about. It still feels too soon to talk about it. But, I think as many of the speakers said, you know, it was, the petition did overturn that. That's only 10% of Fort Collins wanted that signed the petition. You know, I feel like we moved too fast. We didn't move at the speed of trust with the community, and that doesn't mean that we don't revisit it. I think it's a large educational piece of working with the community on why housing types and housing choices are a good thing for our community. I think we can all agree that we want people in the service industry, we want our teachers, our police officers, our essential workers to be able to live in the community that they serve. I think that is important to Fort Collins. Now, how we get there, we're not going to get there by just building single family homes, and we have to start adding more housing choice. I live in a duplex that down the street is a triplex and an apartment complex, and across the street, single family homes, and we all live fine together, and there's no parking issues. And so it can be done. I think people start seeing Fort Collins and don't see those things. I bet if someone drove down my street, they wouldn't notice that I live in a duplex, right? These things are throughout our entire city, and we just are so used to it that there's a lot of fear. And so once we can start moving past that, start moving about what the real issues are, I think that we will eventually be able to get there. So I think zoning and then also a development review, taking those multifamily, the duplex, the townhomes, down to a level 1 or admin review, make it easier.
Quicker review. Excellent. Good. So the next question will start off with Shirley. But it's an easy one. It's not an easy one. I don't know what I said.
I'm old, okay.
So the current council set a goal of having a 15-minute city. So this is a city where you can find life's necessities, do your basic shopping within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of your home. What do you think, is that a goal that you share? And what do you think we need to do as a city to help make that possible?
Okay, let me think about that for a minute. Okay, so you're asking me if I think it's a good idea and what.
How can we get there?
And how can we get there? Okay, so I do think it's a good idea because to me, 15-minute cities just make sense. I love things that are orderly. I love things that are efficient. I love things that are simple and make it easier for people to live. Now, having said all that, to do that is not easy or simple. And we just had, when I was on council, I live in Southwest Fort Collins, and you know it's not very walkable. South College is not walkable, and I was working on that end of the city, and I was working with the city department, and they said, look, what we're going to have to do is we're just going to have to take each section of the city, and as it redevelops, we're going to have to apply the principles of a 15-minute city to each thing as it redevelops. And I know that's probably not the answer that you want to hear because it's going to take time, but I do think that we should move that way.
Yeah, Tricia?
So I am really excited about the work session we had Tuesday night. It was phase 2 of our land use code, and it was looking at commercial corridors. Part of that is the Harmony Corridor, and allowing for less employment and less business there, and allowing more residential. And that's already such a walkable area down towards Harmony Commons, and we have room at our schools there. There's a park there. There will be a community center. I think that's really what we're looking for. There'll be bike paths. It's walkable. But I think part of it too is looking at microtransit and bringing that into our transit system. And then remembering that Fort Collins is not an island unto itself. We need to get out of Fort Collins at times too. So I'm really passionate about bringing rail to our town and all the benefits that will have for our community as well. So I'm looking at a 15-minute city. You can walk to that transit station, you can hop on that train, you can get to where else you need to go.
Excellent. Yeah, Scotty?
I graduated from Fort Collins High School in 1995. I was the last class out of the old building. It would take me about 10 minutes to get from my house, my parents' house at Swallow and Stover, to get to the old Fort Collins High School by sneaking down Stover, sneaking my way onto Remington, staying off of College, staying off of LeMay. The only way you can make this town a 15-minute commute town, even then, was by taking side streets through the neighborhoods. I would never encourage that. As a teenager, I didn't care. I didn't know that. Now as a parent and a father of 3 kids, I was like, no, if I see I'm shaking my fist at kids driving through my neighborhood. It's difficult. I live at Drake and Overland. I worked at the new Fort Collins High School. It would take me 27 minutes to get to just by driving Drake. It's a dream. It's a wonderful idea, but we're past it. We really are past it, unfortunately. But I do love the ideas that we are building within it of commuting within our micro communities within Fort Collins and how those are kind of 5 minutes from each other.
Thank you, Scotty. Yep. And Adam?
So I definitely support the 15-minute city. I think it actually helps build community and connections throughout the city. Our transportation system, it just isn't working. I did a practice thing in leadership Fort Collins where it would take me 3.5 hours to take the bus to the nearest King Supers. Well, I could get there and back and shop in under an hour, and I'm not a sprinter. So that shows that our whole transportation system isn't working. So microtransit with more point-to-point availability, especially for those that have mobile and just ability to get around, make it easier for them to get point-to-point transportation. And then also work on the infill, the green and the gray infill zoning, where we have parking lots, let's go vertical and let's actually make it easier and more condensed where we can. Building developments like Mosaic is awesome, but there's no way with a whole 4,200 homes being built by the Budweiser plant to be 15-minute city. So we just need to make it easier.
Yeah, and Emily?
Yeah, I love 15-minute communities. I put this forward for council priority and it was supported by council. I think, it's so great to think about if from your home you could walk, bike, or roll to your essential services and you don't have to get in your car, you don't have to deal with traffic, you don't have to drive across town. And so I don't think we're past getting there. I think, as Scotty says, we have these little micro neighborhoods around our community and it's about investing in those. How do you invest in your neighborhood center? I live near Taft and Elizabeth. And my neighborhood center is like really outdated if anyone's ever been there. And the thing is it's really hard for those shopping centers to update. There's no incentive, it's costly. And so how do we really invest in updating neighborhood centers so that they are community assets? I think that's where we need to go. And then I also think we need to build out, we're gonna build out our bus rapid transit that we have on Mason. We're gonna build that out on West Elizabeth, on North College, and then eventually on Harmony. We really need to focus on upzoning those areas so that we have the ridership and the people to support those neighborhood centers. And then you can really start investing and building in these little community hubs. It's gonna take a long time, but I think it's the right way to go for our city.
Excellent. And Austin?
Everybody's making a lot of great points here with the 15-minute city. I also believe that a 15-minute city would be good for Fort Collins. One of the things that I've been doing research about with it is maybe potentially even adding extra transport routes into Fort Collins on roads that are not serviced, which would help with faster transportation for people getting around, so they don't have to walk an extended amount of time just to get to the nearest bus stop. That would really help everybody out. And maybe as more research I've done, Fort Collins is growing rapidly year after year. More people wanting to move here and live here. And as we grow, to keep it a 15-minute city, maybe we can even look at blueprints and how much it would cost to maybe even build one of those underground subways as well to get from point A to point B as fast as possible.
Excellent. Yeah, perfect. Good. Okay, so next question. And by the way, Matthew mentioned this at the beginning, but if you do have scraps of paper with questions that you'd like to contribute to the mix, go ahead and bring those forward. If you could kind of pass them along. I'm going to kind of combine a question from the audience with one that I had that brings up this question of the state. So as some of you have mentioned, the state of Colorado has increasingly been getting involved in local housing decisions. What do you think about this question of state control and local control in trying to come up with regional and statewide solutions to the housing shortage? And this will be for Tricia. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So issues for local control only pertain to that community. For statewide issues, I think that's where the state gets to come in and trump, excuse me for that word, uh, local control. I would say housing is a crisis in our city, it's a crisis in our region, it's a crisis in our state, it's a crisis in our country. So I know that I, for one, kind of welcomed the state stepping in and helping us move forward. I know not all communities feel that way, as we have seen by the lawsuit that's moving forward, but I think we would have been stuck in this holding pattern if we hadn't seen the state decide that housing is an issue of statewide concern.
Excellent. And Scotty?
Yeah, if you follow state legislature, this was a very busy year for affordable housing. Lots of things getting passed that were backed both by YIMBY and also by Habitat for Humanity, whether it be with different ways of dealing with, all kinds of things. I don't want to waste my time on that, but there are wonderful things that the state does, like Proposition 123. Is it 123?
Yes.
I can't remember the exact number. And just what the project that's going to be up here by the Mercy House. And the amazing aspects that we're able to get millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and then it got a bigger increase once they found out how great the project was, or great things like that. But yet we also have that idea of, do we want to give up local control on our zoning laws? And that is, again, we share the same values on a lot of things with the same people and the same groups of politicians. Where are we going to draw the line as Fort Collins? And I would love to have that conversation with you all.
Thank you. And Adam?
So this is a tough question, because in one aspect, I was very appreciative that the state eliminated occupancy limits in U+2. I felt that we should have been able to do that at a local level, because I'm afraid the more control we give or for policy for housing at the state, we'll lose the unique and nuanced thing that each city, including Fort Collins, brings when shaping policies. So I do think the state should play a role on some funding aspects and doubling down and tripling down and allowing us to better utilize pilot programs and funding resources. When it comes to actual policy, even though it may be more challenging, I think the policies are better if they are stuck and made here locally. That way we have more control. So if the state changes direction or policies or determination, we still have the control here to dictate exactly what the impact to the city is. So I would like to see the more policy stay here, but financial assistance come from the state is fine.
So, yeah, and Emily?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with the state that housing is a concern of statewide. It's a statewide concern. And, it's really hard for local governments to do this in bubbles, because we could say update our land use to allow for a bunch of housing types, but we're still surrounded by Loveland and Tinmouth and Wellington. And if they don't participate, it doesn't really help. So it is a statewide concern, and every community needs to buy into it. I do think that the state, the laws that they passed last year directed local governments, but it still left a ton of room for local governments to make it their own. We still have a lot of control over what that looks like in our city. And so I think that we have to have some movement, because we are seeing more and more of direct democracy at the local level, which is overturning things like our land use code. If we passed U+2 and got rid of that, that would have been overturned. And so local governments, as somebody who serves in local government, sometimes does need help from the state to actually make progress on really big issues like housing.
And Austin?
So with the way I'm seeing everything when it comes to housing affordability in different communities in Fort Collins, along with the surrounding towns, as was mentioned, Loveland, Wellington, Timnath, places like that. But the greater Fort Collins, Larimer County area, if all of our communities just would come together and do what everybody believes needs to be done for housing affordability, it would make things a lot easier, which in turn would make the same for the people, by the people, 100% truthful with all of our communities. And instead of being divided out of different communities throughout the districts and becoming one with everybody else, would make everything a lot easier.
Thank you, and Shirley.
Thank you. I'm gonna agree probably more with Adam and a little less with Emily, but that's okay. I am almost always an advocate for local control because I think we know best for our communities. I also think it sets a dangerous precedent because I know that sometimes the state laws or one size fits all, and I think it actually ends up hurting not only our community but especially the rural communities that don't have the resources to maybe do what the state's asking them to do. Now, and having said that, I do understand Tricia's point of view of it's a crisis and the state's stepping in on a crisis, and a part of me does want to just kind of shove it off on them and say, here, you fix it. But I would rather keep it local. I would rather keep working, keep talking, and just trying to make everybody get on the same page.
Thank you so much. So I think I'm hoping we have time for one or maybe two more questions. We'll see how this goes. But maybe I'll start with a question from the audience because this was a great one. Someone asked about the fact that our over 65 population in Fort Collins is of course surging, and will be a larger and larger proportion of the population. What are the needs of seniors in our community when it comes to housing, and where can we start with that issue? And this will go back to Scotty, actually.
All right. Great question. We do have an aging community. My parents are here. They're in their 70s. My wife's parents are here. They're in their 70s. They're retired. Two of them are retired. Two of them are still working in their 70s. What we need is, something along the lines of, transportation, quality of life, reassurance for those that are on fixed incomes, that are living in Fort Collins because they helped build what I was talking about before. The people that helped build this community into what it is, the jewel of Colorado, should not be forced out because of a new lifestyle that has come into this town. And we need to remember that. And so things that guarantee transportation is difficult, whether it be through Transport or Dial-A-Ride or Saint, Senior Alternatives and Transportation, which I was a part of when I was on the transportation board. Things like that. Healthcare obviously is going to be a major thing, and luckily we have major healthcare facilities. But and just life in general, the quality of life that people aged into their golden years experiencing, they still should be able to experience that.
Thank you. Yeah, and Adam?
So it's very challenging. It's actually not that challenging. We just need to increase the ability for seniors to find the right size housing that meets their needs. Because we built so many single family homes, a lot of seniors may be living in too big of a home that they need, which is challenging to take care of and afford. So through tax incentives, through property tax moratoriums for seniors, maybe they can take their senior tax credit with them, or better incentivizing to make it easier to move or downsize or upsize, whatever that may need. But really we need more diversity in housing to increase the opportunity for seniors to find that right size living conditions, and also work to strengthen the transportation and the ease of use to get from point A to point B. So they're not waiting exponential amount of hours or times in order to get to the grocery store, go to the hospital, errands. So we need to make it much easier for them to live and affordable.
Excellent. And Emily?
Yeah, so over the past few years, Fort Collins hasn't grown significantly, but our population has changed. We have become much older in those past 2 years. And so, as the state demographer said, our population is going to age quite a bit unless we change something at our city level. And so one of the issues is that many of you here know, I mean, I can see who's in the room. It's really hard. You have a single family home to move into something smaller. The interest rates, the cost, it just doesn't add up. And then, we talked earlier about housing choice and housing supply. We don't have enough smaller units for people to move into. They're filled by young people who are trying to enter the market. Now we have older people who are trying to move into those. And so what we need to do is build more housing. We have to build smaller homes for people so that people can downsize and people can upsize when they need to. And I would say that, along with 15-minute communities, talking about access and transit, will support the aging community. But unless we change what housing supply and housing type we have, we're not going to be an age-friendly city, and we are going to have our population age dramatically.
Austin, yeah.
I agree a lot with what you just said there with building more homes for the senior community. the way I think would be the easiest way to do so is, I know there is one up on North College, but if we were to make a couple extra senior living community centers for 50, 55 plus, with different size houses as a variety in that community, that'll give them a better opportunity to choose what size house they would want to move into, and it would make that decision a lot easier on them and their families.
Thank you. And Shirley.
So there's really not a lot to add to all of that. So I just want to get it personal for just a minute, because again, I'm the oldest one on the panel. Even though we're not retired, we are kind of in that boat of not being able to downsize just because of the market, right? Fortunately, if we really had to, we could, but I do understand that there are many seniors that cannot. And so I am a big advocate of policies that will, and they've, pretty much all been mentioned, for our seniors to be able to age in place.
And Tricia.
Yeah, I too believe that housing choice is an answer. We are seeing that older Americans are some of the fastest growing segments of our homeless population, with fixed incomes, and they're less able to adjust to the affordability crisis that we're experiencing. So one idea I'd really like to see is us repurpose commercial buildings. Gensler Designs just did a study. They looked at 6 different cities. Denver was one of them, and how we can take commercial buildings and make them more workable, almost like the former boarding houses of the past, where we have single units around the edge with shared laundry, bathroom, kitchen facilities in the center. It's workable. It pencils out. So I'd like to see our city start looking at some of these ideas for our old town and some of our higher office buildings.
So, thank you all so much. I think we're just about at time, so give me 1 second here. I had other questions I wanted to ask about the wildland urban interface and sprawl. I had a question about homelessness. There was so much that we didn't get a chance to get to. One of the best things about living in a city the size of Fort Collins is that we actually have quite a bit of access to our city council and to our local officials. So I would encourage you, if I was about to say council members, if candidates and council members are able to linger a little bit to come up and ask those burning questions that you still have that I wasn't able to get to. And also, if the YIMBY leads could raise their hand right now. I see Kate, I see Matthew and Chris in the background. Who else do we have around? Where is Klara? Where'd you go, Klara? Oh, there she is. Grab one of those people if you'd like to hear more about YIMBY Fort Collins, or me, obviously. Talk to us about what we're working on, events that we have coming up next. James, do you want to mention the event that we have coming up soon about phase 2 of the land use code?
Yeah, so I'm a lead of Strong Towns Fort Collins. We have put me on the spot. We have
Sorry.
a meeting coming up next Tuesday with
Clay Fricky, who's the planning manager for the city.
Yeah, who's been working to develop work out the second phase of the land use code. It'll be in the Old Town Library at 6 p.m. So it's open to the public. Anybody who wants to join, this is a good opportunity. You have questions about parking mandates, anything having to do with our commercial land use code. This is a good opportunity to learn what they're planning and ask questions about why they're planning it, what changes you want to see.
So please do order another beer, support the brewery, and come say hi to our wonderful candidates. Thank you all.
Thank you, YIMBY.